Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast that reveals the untold stories and hidden histories of witch trials from around the world. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. Together, we're on a mission to uncover the truth behind the witch hunts that shaped our past and continue to influence our present.
Today, we're diving into a lesser-known chapter of American history, the Connecticut witch trials.
May 25th is the first anniversary of the passing of legislation which cleared the names of Connecticut's witch trial victims.
Connecticut House Joint Resolution 34, resolution concerning certain witchcraft convictions in colonial Connecticut, was adopted by the House of Representatives on May 10, 2023, by a vote of 121 to 30, and was then adopted by the Senate by a margin of 33 to 1 on May 25, 2023.
This bipartisan resolution absolved the innocent victims of the witch trials and apologized to their descendants.
In this episode, we'll explore the incredible efforts to exonerate those falsely accused of witchcraft and hear from some of the dedicated individuals who made this possible.
We're reunited with fellow Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project co-founders Tony Grigo, Beth Caruso, and Mary Louise Bingham, who will share their personal journeys, the significance of this exoneration project, and what the future holds for honoring these forgotten victims.
So sit back, relax, and get ready to discover the powerful stories and passionate advocacy that have brought justice to the victims of Connecticut's witch hunts.
Hey, everybody.
Everyone, thank you so much for coming. It's great to see you.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Why was the exoneration of the Connecticut alleged witches so important? And anyone can jump in.
Well, I think it's important because for so long, people in Connecticut weren't even aware Connecticut had witch hunts. And myself included, until I came across a little booklet in the library written by Richard Tomlinson about Connecticut's witch trials. And most people aren't aware. Well, they are now. We've, over the past, 18 years, certainly have gotten the message out that it's not only Salem.
Yeah.
I have to second what Tony had to say. I personally didn't even know the Connecticut witch trials happened or there were any victims from it until I moved to Connecticut. And I was still in Connecticut a few years before I figured it out. A neighbor actually told me about it because I was telling her I was excited about going to Salem. So, I mean, it just kind of blew me away. And for that reason, the Connecticut victims were quite overlooked. In addition to that, the reason why it's so important is because what happened in Connecticut happened first, and it really set the stage for all the witch trials that happened with the, crescendo at the very end of Salem. It was an influence what happened in Connecticut. So it's a big and important part of the picture that people haven't known about, and therefore those people haven't been known about. So I'm so glad this is all happening.
Mary, what influenced you to get involved in this cause, and why was it important to you?
So I had always known, vaguely that something happened in Connecticut, but was more aware of the Salem witch trials. And then when Elizabeth Johnson Jr. was exonerated, then I said to myself, well, I know that the people in Connecticut have not been exonerated or nothing has been done for them. And then I reached out to Beth and who put me in touch with Jane Garibay, and that set the ball in motion.
so glad that you did that initiative, and so glad that Beth, you had reached out to Jane a couple years earlier, hadn't you?
Yes, I had. It was actually before the pandemic. It was during an election year, so it wasn't a great time to do it at the time I asked her, but she did express a lot of interest in doing something like that for the future. And so she was at the top of my mind when Mary and I had that discussion. But Mary was the one who reached out to her post 2020, and really got the ball rolling in I guess it was late spring of 2022, early summer 2022.
Sarah,
Mar-
did you want to say how you came to meet this group of lovely folks?
sure. I was working on my family genealogy, just going along the tree, not really expecting anything new. I had a couple Salem descendants that I felt familiar with, and there's some Mayflower history there that I had really enjoyed learning about for a while. And I ventured up a line that I wasn't very familiar with, and it took me into Connecticut, and I came across the name Winifred Benham and quickly found that she had been in court as an accused witch with her daughter. She's my ninth great grandmother, and I was ready for all the information. I wanted to see how they're memorialized, what history is out there. I was assuming that there was a lot of information that was going to be available, but there isn't, and there wasn't, except for I did come across a very important Facebook page, CT Witch Memorial. And I started learning about the Connecticut history there first. And I wanted to have more conversations. So I decided to start a Facebook page a Facebook group that might bring people together talking about any descendants involved in witch trials. And that's how I started my conversations with Mary and Beth and Tony. And I was excited.
Yeah. I was the last one to join in on the fun, but it's been a great ride, and I've enjoyed working with all of you so much. It's been 2 wonderful years knowing you. So thank you
I
all.
feel the same. Your everything you've done is just like accelerated things, whether it was this podcast or all your social media, all your spreadsheets.
I love
Josh's
the
spreadsheets
spreadsheets.
are absolutely amazing, and they kept us organized. They kept us on track. So thank you, Josh.
Yeah, that's all that I can do to keep myself on track is chart everything. So, yes. And Sarah had mentioned the important CT Witch Memorial page. Um, Tony and Beth, what initially inspired you to start that page?
Well, it was 2016, I believe, and we had learned that Mayor Donald Trinks in Windsor, our former mayor, I should say, was interested in doing something for Windsor's two witch trial victims, Lydia Gilbert and Alice Young. And so we started having conversations with people, and I had a chance to get to know Tony better. Tony described what had happened in earlier efforts, how there hadn't been that much interest, and how people still overwhelmingly just didn't know about the Connecticut trials. So we thought our chances of getting Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert recognized in the town of Windsor would be much greater if we could build awareness somehow that these trials actually did take place in Connecticut. So it started from there, and both Tony and I wrote stories about the witch trial victims, talked about current events, lectures, or um, other things, and that's how it got rolling. And then, little bit by little bit, people learned about it.
Well, Beth is the one that set up that whole Facebook page. She has to take the credit for that. When it comes to computers, I'm not that savvy on it. And from that point on, once we got on Facebook, it just kind of snowballed for us.
Tony, you've been really good about adding context, local context to the history. When I read your posts, I learn more than I'm expecting. So your contributions have been really helpful too. Your page that you guys built isn't just, it is enjoyable to use, but it really is hearty. So thank you for building that out.
And thank you to Mary for posting in there now. She's been a wonderful addition, and that page has thousands of very active. You get so much engagement, all of you, on your posts. It's really amazing to see the community that you put together there. So
I was just going to say that's mostly Beth and Tony, because you've had that page for so long. Beth, you've had that page since about the time you wrote your first book. Is that correct?
I think it was created in February of 2016. But we're so thrilled that you're joining us, Mary, because it's always great to have fresh content. We try and keep the page just Connecticut focused, because there is so little information about Connecticut compared to Salem. So we decided in the beginning we didn't want it to be dwarfed by all the Salem information, even though that is also extremely important. It just seemed like there were already so many places for that. So Mary is doing some great research on John Winthrop Jr. She's been so actively involved with this Connecticut exoneration and is very knowledgeable about um, the New England witch trials and how Connecticut and Massachusetts connect with each other. So we are thrilled to have her as a new moderator and contributor to CT Witch Memorial.
Thank you. It's an honor to be a part of that page. So thank you very much.
As a descendant, I've really benefited from it because it's really helped me distinguish too that there's so much interesting lore, but being able to find out what is it that I know about Winifred. That I used your Facebook content to start that research. So thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And as the page has gone on, we've learned more things as well. I mean, we've made discoveries with other people. And as we learn new information pertaining to Connecticut trials, some of which might need to be corrected as time goes on and more research is done, it really has been a wonderful thing to add that new information to the page. And so, for all your listeners, if you have any research about the Connecticut witch trials, something that's not known to other people, then please contact us. Sometimes we do have guest posts as well. So consider that as well if you have pertinent information to Connecticut witch trials. Oh, and by the way, CT witch, witch actually stands for Witch Interrogation Trials and Colonial Hangings. So it's actually an acronym.
And another important step in the beginning of this was Mary creating a video naming the names of the victims, these so little known victims of Connecticut witch trials. Mary, can you tell us about your video? What inspired you to do that?
I don't know originally. I can't put the words to that, but today I think as I've gone back and done other memorials at Proctor's Ledge, it stands for something tragic that has happened that we need not to forget about. So I think for me, because right now, there is no memorial for Connecticut, by going down there and doing the video and naming the names and then sending that video out to the representatives, kind of for me was like hitting home that we need to talk more about this, and these people, their names need to be cleared. They need to be recognized as not committing any offense that they were accused of, especially the capital crime of witchcraft.
Having their name on a memorial is so important. I mean, that's the history we know of them, but it's an opportunity to recognize them by name of their innocence.
Absolutely. And that was a very important reason why we needed it in the um, document that we provided to the Connecticut legislature in hopes of exonerating them. It was important to name them as well as we could.
It was so important to get the names in the resolution to give these people that respect.
Absolutely. I know it was hard with Goody Bassett and Goody Knapp because we really wanted to find out their first names. I know Mary made a lot of effort to try and look it up, but we were just unable to find the specific names. Hopefully, in the future, someone will be able to nail that down. I'm hoping so, especially with Goody Knapp, because it sounds like she was either in the New colony of New Netherland or New Sweden. So it may be possible in the future for someone to figure that out through the records of New Netherland. New Sweden was, very, very small colony, which didn't last for very long. So my greater hope is in the colony of New Netherland, that maybe somewhere buried deep in those records, which are still being translated, even though a lot of them or most of them have been translated, that maybe the Knapp family will show up and we'll figure out Goody Knapp's first name.
That's a good point, too. The landscape of the colonies was different in the 17th century than what we think of around the time of the Revolution.
Right.
And we did make sure that we included both Connecticut Colony and New Haven Colony. Um, Saybrook Colony didn't have records of any witch hunts before it joined the others.
Mhm.
But we did exhaust all those avenues to make sure everyone was included who was in what later became Connecticut. So
Yeah. And even what was Connecticut at the time, which is now New York, part of Long Island.
One of the things, when we have the names and we have the towns, if we know which town or the era, because there's so much that is known of founding families, we can start to imagine their
Mhm.
interactions. And, these accused were in the community with these men or these other stories that we're more familiar with. And it can bring more of a real picture that the history is part of the cultural heritage.
Absolutely.
yeah, friend of the show, Margot Burns always asks who was in the room when something important happened, and asking who was in the community is just as important. And I would say we haven't, well, we touched on family history a little in the beginning. And for people out there who have Connecticut ancestors, you may find that some of your ancestors were present in communities that had witch trials. And that can get you thinking about what might their role have been. What was
Mhm.
life like in that town at that time?
You really can tell a lot. I mean, just with the Alice Young case, figuring out who all her neighbors were really helped um, it come together with that case to realize she was living right next door to a family who lost three, possibly four children during the time of the epidemic. Um, so that epidemiology that came along with that case by seeing where the cluster was really did say a lot. And seeing the neighbors who were there, they moved right after the hanging happened.
I want to acknowledge all of the other volunteers that we had on this project. Many were descendants, others were not. Um, and we really benefited from that community. There were dozens and dozens of people. Can't possibly name them all right now. There's so many people involved in this. And so much of that was built upon the foundation of CT Witch Memorial. And then others joined based on our social media and the Discord group that you and your son started, Sarah.
One of the 9-year-olds that was interested in what was happening was my son Ricky, a descendant, and he helps set up a Discord so we could have a public conversation that was kind of outside the social media activity. We had so much happening so fast. We needed a just that hub, and that was what we were able to use.
And for such a widely distributed group of people as descendants and others that were interested in seeing justice done, um, there was still a very important element in Connecticut on the ground. Beth was utilizing her connections and Tony his from years of doing this advocacy. And you mentioned the other 9-year-old that was involved. One of Beth's coworkers, that's her son that got involved.
So, yes, there was another 9-year-old, William Schlote.
Yeah, William gave important testimony at a hearing before the Joint Committee on Judiciary in the Connecticut General Assembly. William Schlote, a 9-year-old at the time, a very eloquent testimony, and also a high school freshman gave her testimony. And getting that input from those young people to me was just so valuable. um, certainly got the attention of the media and the senators and representatives that were in that room.
It absolutely did. The young woman, Catherine Carmen, she's only a freshman in high school, yet she spoke more eloquently than I've ever, than most adults I've ever heard speak. And that was extremely powerful having them involved. They really, I thought, kind of flipped the script, changed a lot of minds. There's also a couple other people I really want to acknowledge now, and that was historian Kathy Hermes helped us. She got involved with us, and she's an expert on this history. So she actually wrote the exoneration, the resolution document that we started from. And she also is a JD, so she is a lawyer, legal historian as well. So when it hit Judiciary Committee at that point, there were really no changes to it because she knew a lot about how to write this, and she knew the history better than anyone, and her expertise is well respected, not just in Connecticut, but all over the US. So she was huge. She was our main historical expert who we consulted with about this. And then some other people I want to really give a shout out to were Jane Garibay. We mentioned her already. She took the lead in bringing this into the General Assembly, specifically in the House of Representatives. But she did a lot of behind the scenes work before this ever even, got going, just to warm up people, test the waters, so to speak. But it wasn't just that. Afterwards, once it was there, she talked to our group constantly about what to expect, which approach to take, what's going to be more successful, to do this or to do that. I mean, she was just phenomenal. She was teacher, she was mentor, she was supporter. She meant so much to this bill. And then, later on in the Senate, we got Dr. Saud Anwar to support us, which was really great as well. But like you said, there's so many more people who were involved who just um, gave it their all, whether it was writing letters of testimony or, contacting senators or our representative in other ways. There was just so much support, more than there ever had been in compared to any effort before this.
I just felt like there was so much, the participation was this availability. And, Jane was available to us, but whatever was available at her disposal to push forward, she did it. And there were some supporters that have chosen to stay, out of the conversation. They were doing the same thing. It's just really amazing how, it was a huge coalition. It really was.
It was. And you said about it just spreading so fast, the enthusiasm for this project. It was amazing. Because I had been involved in the Windsor effort before, which was wonderful. But maybe Tony can speak more about this. He was involved in the very first efforts before social media, and it was a whole different attitude. It was a whole different ball game then.
Yeah, social media made a big change and all that. I mean, we had no vehicle to get the word out. No press was writing stories. A little bit later into that, got a lot of good coverage in the press. New York Times, Hartford Courant, all came around. But it really took off when social media started. You could get the word out to so many more people, and all you had to do was Google. Go in Google and you learn what direction you needed to go in.
Right. Well, these first people, it really took an emotional toll on them, but they got the conversation going. And, you would see at the time, the attitude was not a serious one as far as the public at large and people really being engaged and thinking it was a meaningful thing. In fact, it was heartbreaking. I saw a cartoon of this woman and her daughter, and someone, put them around a black cauldron. I mean, it was horrible. It was vicious. They were trying to advocate for their great grandmother. And this is the kind of feedback they got. And then take it a few years later, a decade later, plus a couple years. And there was still some of that, but the attitude had changed so dramatically where people were empathetic and they really started to understand what these poor people went through by being falsely accused of something that's, wasn't even possible. They were, supposedly sitting down at a table signing a pact with the devil or something to do harm to the community. Well, I mean, we know that's not even possible. So, I just thought it was wonderful in a relatively short time if you think about it historically. But, 12 12 years or so, and that's 13 years. That's a drop in the bucket, really, historically, how rapidly attitudes shifted. And so we will be forever grateful for the first people who started this because they really did take some emotional hits at the time, bringing this to the fore. And were treated unfairly. So, you know, they really deserve a lot of recognition and gratitude for what happened in 2023, the passage of the resolution, because people were already warmed up.
Well, I think the other thing that is important too is that uh, I noticed when we were getting a lot of press, there was a lot of negative articles and, who cares? That happened 300 years ago. But I think one of the things that was supportive for us was the fact that so much had been done in Salem uh, that it kind of balanced out. People would say, well, you know what? It can't be all that bad because there was all these people in Salem that worked for years to get their corrections for their ancestors. So that was the flip side of the coin. So I think the people in Salem, uh, I don't think they realized it at the time, but uh, that's really what I think was support for what we were trying to do.
And I would like to thank Rachel Christone for that. Because when I went down to a book signing of Dan Gagden's, I told her and her assistant, Jill Christensen, that Connecticut was going to be doing this. And without expecting anything, she said, please let us put something on our social media about this. And I remember just being so affected by that as soon as I got in my car, I called Sarah right away and I was in tears. I said, the Salem Witch Trial Museum, the Salem Witch Museum is going to help us. And that was a big thing too. And of course that came right after Elizabeth Johnson Jr. was finally exonerated as well. So we had a little bit of that momentum going for us too.
I want to talk about the moment when this finally passed. It had passed the House by a wide margin, and something like 120 votes to 30 votes, and very bipartisanly had been moved on to the Senate. And we were all fortunate enough to be in New England at the time nearby and able, the five of us, to go to the Senate and sit in the gallery and watch that. And I want to start with you, Tony, because you've worked on this so very, very long. What was your feeling, your response when you finally saw this passed after you'd been toiling away for so many years?
Well, it seemed like all the efforts that I had put into it, uh, myself and many others, that people kind of thumbed their nose at us in the beginning, thinking we were, what's the sense of this? But it was for me personally, it was a big relief. It was like gee, we finally accomplished something. Those folks were 100% innocent. It was just ridiculous what they were charged with. And I understand the times were different. Those folks lived in different times. But nevertheless, it was like I lost this burden and I didn't need it anymore.
And Beth, you had been through some of those roller coaster, I'd say, experiences of ups and downs trying to get exoneration and memorials in place. How did you feel when that burden was lifted?
Well, I was so relieved and so moved. And just the very moment that it passed, I mean, I remember it like slow motion. There was a big board behind us with all the senators' names, and it says yay or nay. And we together, we just watched that board flip from neutral to green, green, green,
Yeah.
green, 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 green. There was just one red mark.
It's right.
But the rest, and you know, they actually sat and well, I would say one senator talked most of the time, but they talked about this for over an hour. And so when it was finally time to vote on it, and we saw it all just flipping green, oh my gosh, it was just thrilling. And when that it became obvious, even though the time wasn't quite up, we turned around and there were senators who were waving at us, who were smiling at us, who were blowing us kisses. The lieutenant governor was there waving at us, and she was a major supporter that this should pass because, you know, a lot of it had to do with the condition of women and the misogyny of the time, which so many people, it's coming back and we're really relating to that now. So, just to have all that positive energy coming towards us, you know, we as a group, we're all together in the gallery, and they're all just waving and smiling, and everyone was just so happy that this passed. Well, I shouldn't say everyone, but most people really got it. I felt like the education for so many years finally paid off, that people understood the significance of this and how important it was to descendants and how important it was to anyone who really cares about justice and seeing history in a more clear view. Um, it was very special, and I will just never forget those few minutes. They were just amazing.
Mm. Mary and then Sarah, I want to hear from both of you. How did you feel? How did you react when you saw that board light up with all that green?
For me, it was surreal at first, but then I quickly realized that history was made. And for myself, also, being a descendant of 3 that were hanged in Salem, I felt so grateful for all of the descendants of all of those who were convicted and hanged, that they would finally, um, mm, sorry, gosh,
It's okay.
that,
We
that
can
they,
edit.
they finally had justice for their ancestors.
Yay.
Yeah, it was a relief. And it did feel like justice, and it was very satisfying to see that it was a justice that the majority of people wanted to give. There was this, we felt this growing surge of support over that year, going from the initial hearing where we definitely felt, to a point, I felt unwelcome that day by not anything in particular, but specifically and questions that were asked to me as a descendant, it told me that I didn't have a right to be talking about what I was, asking for justice for. And then to go over the next several months, few months actually, to go over the next few months and to be sitting in this beautiful gallery with these leaders of a state that are doing important things. And they, as Beth said, we were getting smiles and little waves and we felt welcome and it felt like it was going to happen, but we didn't know until that moment. And, sitting in the benches up in the balcony, looking at each other, like, here we are. We had other people with us that wanted this, who had written testimony. We were all sitting there waiting, and then the board goes green. And it was just a relief. And I felt so happy for Alice Young that she started as just one of Windsor hanged as a witch in margins of historic documents to having her name in legislation saying this person is not a witch. And that's huge. It was historic. I felt the historicness of it.
Yeah, I want to say it was one of the great highlights of my life to be there and see that get done. And to be with all of you in that moment was really special to me. I wish that, the business happens on work days. So other people, unfortunately, were unable to join us, but it was such a good time. And seeing just the one nay and something like 33 yays was just so much overwhelming support there in that room. And it felt like a chapter was done, but it also feels like there's still more work to do. So, um, who wants to talk about what's next for Connecticut's alleged witches?
Well, I can tell you what I'd like to see,
Yeah.
and I think you all know it, and you all feel the same way as I do, is that we have some kind of a permanent monument remembering the role that these people played in our Connecticut history. And up until a few years ago, there was absolutely none remembering any of these people.
We've had memorial bricks, but that's about it, and not
Yeah.
even all of them. I agree. I think it would be wonderful to have a memorial for them because they were not placed in proper graves. They were probably unceremoniously thrown into a ditch after their hanging. And so descendants really have nowhere to go, but it's beyond just the familial connection. A monument is a reminder of a dark chapter in history. And, unfortunately, we're seeing some attitudes like that in different corners of our country or the world at times. And it's important to have a reminder that things happened and we need to treat each other a little more carefully. Watch what we say. Make sure we have evidence behind what we say. So it's more than just a memorial to these people. It's also a reminder to everyone. And I really hope that happens. But I also really would like there to be a permanent historical exhibit, which talks about the different chapters of the witch trials in Connecticut. Because, as I said before, what happened in Connecticut started out 1647, 45 years before Salem. It was brutal, it was unrelenting, But yet we had, we also had a big panic, the Hartford witch panic, which was similar to Salem in some ways. But then you have a voice of reason that came along um, in John Winthrop Jr., and it really turned things around in Connecticut before the Salem trials even started. So this is, yes, it's another witch trial history, but it's also a very unique history, um, and is a companion in a way to learning about the Salem trials, because all these factors were set up before Salem even got going. And in fact, other Massachusetts trials happened before Salem even got going as well. So I don't think you can truly talk about Salem anymore unless you can talk about it in this larger context about how the trials got started in the first place. And Connecticut is such a big part of that. Um, I think a historical exhibit would be very complementary to what's already available in Salem to talk about the beginning and middle of these trials. And still, there are a lot of people all around the country, around the world, who don't know about the Connecticut trials. Certainly, there are many, many more than ever before. But I think it deserves a permanent exhibit to show people exactly what happened and take people through the stories easily and in a continuous, very, remarkable way that leaves an impression on people.
I can't wait for it. It's been this past year, there's a larger group of us putting our brains together creatively, trying to see, which path forward. And at this stage, it is going to continue to take more hands on deck and partnerships and coalitions. And it feels very promising. Connecticut has such a rich humanities program, and they are uplifting much of their cultural history right now. And I would love to see that this history um, be brought into the fold. And as you just eloquently showed, it is it completes not completes a puzzle, but it's very important puzzle pieces to history and our modern social justice um, perspective on what people are experiencing across the world, and just the vulnerable populations, how we're dismissing them, or are we reaching out and finding justice and fairness and human dignity together. I think we should have Beth read the names if she's interested in doing so. I think it'd be
Sure.
wonderful to.
I want to read all the names of those in Connecticut who were affected by the witch trials and brought before the court in some way. Some of them killed, some of them indicted, but later found innocent, or many had to flee the colony. So Alice Young, 1647, Mary Johnson, 1648, Joan Carrington, 1651, John Carrington, 1651, Goodwife Bassett, 1651, Goodwife Knapp, 1653, Lydia Gilbert, 1654, Mary Sanford, 1662, Nathaniel Greensmith, 1663. Rebecca Grainsmith, 1663. Mary Barnes, 1663. Those were the ones who were convicted to hang to death. 1. Elizabeth Seeger. She was also convicted, but she was reprieved in 1665. Others, indicted, forced to flee, banished, or even acquitted, continued to live with their reputations destroyed. Their names were the following: Goodwife Bailey, 1655. Nicholas Bailey in 1655. Elizabeth Godman in 1655. Elizabeth Garlick in 1658. There was an unknown person in Saybrook in 1659. Margaret Jennings in 1661. Nicholas Jennings in 1661. Judith Bartlett in 1662. Andrew Sanford in 1662. William Ayres, 1662. Judith Ayres, 1662. James Wakely, 1662. Catherine Harrison, 1668 and 1669. William Graves in 1667. Elizabeth Clausen, 1692. Eucrosia, 1692. Marcy Disborough in 1692. Mary Harvey in 1692. Hannah Harvey in 1692. Mary Staples in 1692. Winifred Benham in 1697, and Winifred Benham Jr. in 1697. And there may be others who are yet to be discovered. So we're grateful we have this resolution document. If we need to in the future, it's something that's already established, and it would be easier to add a name than to start from scratch again.
And Connecticut's the first state to issue an apology in this manner.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of Witch Hunt.
If you'd like to learn more about the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project, visit connecticutwitchtrials.org and then come visit Witch Hunt on YouTube.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.